Florida Anon here, full-time guide by trade. I work backwoods, swamps, pine scrub forests, freshwater, and saltwater for trophy game, hunting/fishing. Specifically work untouched and unpressured areas. I've seen and experienced a lot of weird and terrifying things over the years, and heard more than a few stories from other guides. As you can tell, I can't green text, so I won't even try. Kick back, grab a snack, and get ready for a wall of fucking text. Old heads in the outdoors industry around here don't like people talking about things that happen for fear of scaring off business and tourists that they depend on for a living. Didn't fully understand until recently just how far up the ladder that suppression of information goes. The state of Florida, Fish and Wildlife Conservation, and other land management/outdoor orientated entities are, and have been for decades, pushing things under the rug so as not to reduce Florida outdoors tourism. Due to this, I feel like it's time someone started telling people about the things going on down here. I could give a shit if you believe me or not. Lots of what I have to tell are my own stories, and I'll share them as well as I can remember them. But it's hard to describe things that not only don't make logical sense, and happen quickly during what were, at the time, extremely terrifying moments. The other stories will be secondhand accounts from other guides that want to get their stories out. A lot of these stories come out after copious amounts of alcohol, so I'll fill in the gaps as barest I can, so that they will make sense to the general public. First off, I doubt many people outside of people in the outdoor guiding communities of Florida have ever heard of them, but the Drass are some ass-puckeringly terrifying primordial entities that have been around since the first recorded history of people that made their way into the Floridas. Best way I can describe them is nature's guardian. From what I've learned, there are a bunch of them, and they all have their own territories that they protect. They're all unique in their own ways, not just in how they look, but also how they act and respond to people in their territory. They also have their own ways of being appeased and their own set of rules. The general idea of keeping them happy and respecting the nature in their territories is a good way to keep them away from you. There's the amalgamation that looks like a giant lump of dead animals all smashed together moving in a pile. I'm pretty sure that one's sole goal is to scare away anyone that makes its way into its territory, because if the giant mass of moaning and screeching flesh doesn't send you running away with bricks dropping out of your pant legs, then the smell will definitely drive you off. Next, my personal favorite is the Raccoonipede. It's been known to have a relatively small territory compared to the other Drass I've heard about, but this fucker is a whole different kind of terrifying. Take 20 to 30 raccoons and lop one in half. Now lop the heads and tails off the rest. Take your pucker-inducing parts and stitch them all together, with the front half of your first raccoon at the front and its ass at the caboose. Now you have a Raccoonipede. Now take said furry abomination and make it deathly silent. You can imagine the fear and panic it causes when someone looks up into a tree that they were looking at seconds earlier and sees this fucker peeking back at them. Luckily, this one is relatively harmless and is well known for accepting gifts in the form of food and parts of game taken in the area. I can always talk about more, but that's up to you guys. The last one I'll cover is the Broken Drass. This one specifically stalks a certain river system in the central Florida area. It's fucked up. No one can really pinpoint what made it the way it is, but guides blame it on people encroaching on the river system and destroying/building out of the forest surrounding the river. None of the other Drass are purposefully malicious. This fucker wants nothing more than terror, fear, and harm for the hell of it. It's the only Drass I've ever had a direct encounter with, and this thing is fucked. Honestly, my encounter with the thing is a story in its own right. Let me know if you want to hear more, and I'll gladly share. At this point, I just want to get as much out as possible so that people really know what's going on down there. Well, I guess I'll keep telling you guys about the Drass that I've had an encounter with. First, to give you guys a good feel for them before I try and tell you the other people's stories. This particular Drass likes to roam a portion of what's called the Ecology River system. It's a tributary of the St. Johns River and runs through the heart of Central Florida. It's said that all the development on its land has pushed it back farther into the river system, and that may be why it's so fucked up. But honestly, who knows? We don't understand much about these things, and this one doesn't really give a shit about us. I was making my way through the river system, scouting potential fishing spots for a client that was looking to bag some big trophy fish in untouched waters. When I had my encounter with it, I'll never forget the smell. This was the first thing I noticed. It was the smell of swamp rot, stagnant water, and decay, much like the smell you get when you step into an untouched mud puddle in the middle of a swamp. I was making my way through some game trails in relatively high and dry grounds near what I knew to be a productive fishing area when I got hit with the smell. The fact that it was so out of place for the area made my hair stand on end, and an immediate feeling of wrongness washed over me. I've seen and dealt with more than my fair share of hostile animals and people in the wilderness, and have learned how to keep my cool, even when I feel like I'm about to die. This feeling flushed all that right down the drain. I immediately broke out one of the most important rules in outdoors guiding. I blindly hauled ass into a brush like a scared kid. I remember almost immediately losing track of where I was and almost any sense of direction, despite knowing this whole area like the back of my hand. It was like the entire forest had turned against me. Every time I slowed down, the smell would get stronger, almost like it was following me, and if I slowed down, it would try to overtake me. It was enough to keep me running until I felt like my lungs were about to burst. No matter what I did, said, or tried to do, the damn forest kept getting more and more unfamiliar until I was forced to stop and try to survey my surroundings. I almost shit a full brick wall in my pants when I saw that I had stopped not a few dozen feet from where I had initially been hit with the smell. I was running in fucking circles. There's a sense of terror that washes over you when you know that not even the gun on your hip will help with whatever the fuck is happening, and let me tell you, it's not a feeling I ever want to experience again. After taking a minute and choking on the smell, I finally managed to find the game trail I had taken in and forced myself to slowly walk it back out, not running, despite that lizard part of my brain was screaming. It wasn't until I made it back out into the relatively open clearing that I ran back to the main river that the smell finally went away. I took stock of myself, covered in cold sweat, piss still barely in my bladder, and thankfully clean underwear. Then I took a look back where I had come from. The only way I could describe it won't do it justice. The thing was easily 9 feet tall, gangly, and covered in rotting swamp vegetation, almost humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong and stretched with absurdly long limbs and neck. And where the head should have been was a tangle of at least a dozen deer antler sheds. It was just tucked slightly behind a tree, staring at me with a gaze that oozed hatred, even though I couldn't see eyes of any kind. I know it's not much, but it's hard to describe a terrifying situation in detail when your main focus at the time was just staying alive and keeping your shorts from overflowing with shit. Another one in the vein of cryptid-like things that Florida has is the mimics. I've seen a lot of talk about skinwalkers and the such on here, but as far as I know and have heard, there have been no verified skinwalkers account this far south. A lot of creatures, or the things that do end up being labeled as a skinwalker encounter on here, but I have a feeling that there's something entirely different. The mimics are one such thing. Simply put, they're unverified voices in the woods. They could sound like a record stuck on a loop, the same tone, inflection, and varying volumes on repeat, or they could sound like your voice repeating things back to you. I've only heard of one time that the voices ever seem to do anything close to sentient, in the sense that they try to form a sentence out of the abundance of voices it probably heard and wasn't just a direct repeat of something someone had said. They're known to try and lure people deep into the woods or into dangerous areas. For what? I have no clue, and as far as I know, no one has ever seen what makes the voices or why they do it, past causing harm. I'm not saying there's no person to ever see where the voices come from, but if they have, they never made it back to tell anyone. Another distinctly terrifying thing in Florida is the Everglades plane graveyards. There have been many a plane crash in the Glades, and while some of them are easily verified and explainable, there are more than a few that have gone unreported and unexplained. The phenomena around the crashes that is really scary involves how these drowned planes seem to pop up, then disappear throughout the Glades. You're always told never to use downed planes as landmark when you're navigating the Glades, due to how frequently they pop up and disappear, and also seem to move of their own volition. I was once told by an old-timer that if I ever come across more than one downed plane in a half-mile area, to immediately turn around and not come back for a couple of weeks. The superstition is that plane graveyards are a marker of an area that is a kind of soft spot between places in time and space, a spot where things go in but never come back out, and if they do, it's not the same as how they went or when they went in. An old story passed around by guides is how a man was searching for a gator fishing area, only to stumble across the plane graveyards, only to be warded off by another boat. After describing the boats and planes to a fish and wildlife conservation officer, due to how freaked out he was by the whole situation, he was informed that what he saw was impossible, because the boat and man he was talking about were declared missing and legally dead over 20 years prior. Have you ever happened upon or near the nexus of all realities? That I know of definitely hit some areas that we call soft spots, places where time and geography don't line up, but not like what it sounds like you're describing. There was times where we found a full saltwater reef environment in the middle of the glades, which is entirely brackish. There was also a time where we clocked 3 hours on our engine hour meter, but had managed to run from sunrise to almost dusk. That's actually a good description of some of the characteristics of the nexus of all realities. Fucking awesome. Now I want to go to Florida sooner. If you say so. I've never heard of it described as that down here. Plus, there are a bunch of areas like that across the state. Small patches of woods in urban or built-up areas that are much larger than they should be once you're inside them. And possibly deep lakes where there shouldn't be one. And salt water in places that are landlocked as far as Florida goes. I'll update more on these and other stuff you guys are interested in when I get the chance tomorrow. Early run on the water tomorrow to scout out some new fishing grounds, so I'm out for the night. Sorry for the delay, back with more. I was talking with another guide who was scouting spots with me yesterday, and brought up a good one that you guys have mentioned here and there in this thread. Skunk apes. His only encounter with one was a doozy from the sounds of it. He heard reports of something tearing down stands and feeders on a hunting plot that he leased out with a few other guides. No one could seem to figure out what was doing it. The rest of the guides were lazy and didn't spend much time on the property as he did, and blamed it on local shitheads tearing up property for fun. Taking it upon himself, he decided to stake out the hunting plots for a weekend, spending a night at each of the 3 stands, seeing if he could spot who was destroying the plots. The first 2 nights were uneventful, but on the 3rd morning, he heard one of the stands he had staked out previously was being fucked with. One of the ladders was lag bolted to the tree, and its bottom section ripped free and tossed a few dozen feet away into a small pile of brush, along with the feeder being tipped over. Deciding to take a chance and assuming that someone was watching him cycle through the stands, he stayed in the same one he had the night before, hoping that they'd figure he'd moved on. Early next morning, just before sunrise, he said that he got a whiff of something that he described as the worst mix of body odor and dank weed. Immediately, assuming that a local homeless pothead was the one tearing up the stands, he scanned around with a spotting binocular until he saw a flash of eye reflection. He said that his blood pretty much froze when he saw the animal reflection about 7 feet up into the air, and peeking around the edge of a bunch of trees near the end of the shooting lane that they had cut out. The one thing that he vividly remembers is how tall it was, how wide it was, and the fact that it made sure to make eye contact with him before sliding back into the trees. This is a guy who was trained to listen for and spot animals, and he said the thing was dead silent in its movements, and while it might have not been the 9-foot tall Bigfoot described by most people up north, it was easily 7 foot tall and wider in the shoulders than any man he had ever met. Never mentioned anything about it being hairy or any fur color, and that's probably due to seeing it in the weird twilight that dawn brings, but he said it definitely didn't have the silhouette of a normal person. The smell also faded quickly after he saw it slip back into the trees. He refuses to hunt there anymore, but he's never heard any more reports of it showing back up. The one thing that really freaked me out in his story was just how quiet the thing was. The fact that it could sneak up on him while being that big is more concerning for me. Bears and the like make enough noise that you know they're coming, and panthers are about the only things that move silently enough to go undetected and are relatively large, but this thing apparently did not make a sound. Let's get out of the woods for a bit though. I don't mind going back to them if you guys want more, but there's a lot more to talk about with the amount of water and coastlines we have. I've heard more than a few reports of ghost ship popping up and subsequently disappearing after not responding to hails and being sighted offshore or popping up on radar, but not being there when a rescue ship finally makes it to its last known location. The only one I've personally happened upon in that vein, well, maybe not overtly supernatural, was enough to make me ditch the boat after tossing an EPIRB for the Coast Guard to track down. We were running about 25 miles off the east coast, chasing kingfish, when we heard a call go across the VHF channel 16 for a boat in distress. We heard the initial hail for Mayday, but the person sending out the call was doing it to report an empty vessel floating away from a well-known spot of reef fishing. We were nearby. Some decided to swing by and see if there was still a need for help due to not seeing many people out on the water that day. I've seen boats drift off anchor while someone is driving and leave them stranded, and other similar events, so we figured it wouldn't be something critical unless someone was injured and had fallen overboard. We hailed the person sending out the Mayday call for the other vessel, and they said there were only 2 vessels in the area, and he hadn't seen anyone in the water or bubbles rising, like someone was below scuba diving. Weird, but still nothing creepy. We managed to find the boat not far off the spot that the original call said it would be, and that's when everything started to look weird. First, the anchor was securely stowed at the front of the boat, so there was no sign of it drifting off anchor or snapping an anchor line. What really set our hair on end was the signs that it had been adrift for a while. The bait on the deck was hard and crusty, the live well was off, and the fish still in it were obviously bloated and rotting from stewing in hot stagnant salt water. And the key was in the on position, but it had no power across the console, and the motor obviously wasn't running. This thing had been left in the on and ready position when it was abandoned, making us think we had a man overboard scenario that was a couple of days old at the least. Calling it in with the Coast Guard, we relayed the registration numbers to them and asked if they had any reports of it being missing. I swear the lady on the other end of the line sounded like she was about to shit when she replied. The boat had been reported missing 2 weeks earlier in the Keys, and we found it off the coast near Ponce Inlet, about 400 miles away up the coast. That part wasn't weird. Due to the current flow up at the coast, it was natural for it to head that way. What really set us off was the fact that it disappeared on a sunny flat day, and we had the swell over 2 foot during the time it was missing. Short of these guys abandoning ship, there was no reason for the boat to be in pristine condition but unmanned. We had heard reports of pirates seizing boats and tossing victims overboard after taking what they wanted. What they did next was really fucked up. They would call in vessels across main radio channels, luring people like us out to them, then doing the same thing with our boat. It was about the time we received the report back from the Coast Guard lady that it all clicked with us. We hadn't seen the other boat that initially called it in, and we weren't sticking around to find out who it was. We popped up blinking EPIRB in the boat and hauled ass back to shore. We heard later that they had hauled the boat back in, but there were no signs of foul play, and it was all chalked up to a freak accident of some kind. The 2 guys that had been in the boat were never found. As far as I know, nothing was missing off of it, but it was enough to set our spook radar on high alert and get us the bug out.